we would talk about the boat case, and he was very intent on clearing Paul's name.
What did he say?
He said that his number one goal was clearing Paul's name. And I thought that was so strange because my number one goal was to find out who killed my sister and Paul.
But that wasn't Alec's concern, main concern?
I know he must have wanted that too, but I don't know how he could have thought about anything else.
Hello and welcome to True Crime Rocket Science, the most authentic voice in true crime. As we know, Maggie listed her murderer as the beneficiary of her estate. Her estate included one property with a resale value of $3.9 million, Moselle, and another worth a smidgen under $1 million, the Edisto Beach house. So Maggie had combined assets of about $5 million, give or take, which is roughly half the amount Alec Murdaugh is accused of stealing. But the plot thickens when we look at who Maggie elected to handle the estate and what that person ultimately did. Now, if Maggie knew what ultimately happened to her finances, she'd be turning in her grave. But before we get to the rest of this analysis, if you haven't already subscribed to True Crime Rocket Science, it is the most authentic voice in true crime, isn't it? Isn't it? If you haven't already subscribed, please do. You can do it right now. You can hit the subscribe button, hit the notifications bell. If you're enjoying this episode, please like, share, leave a comment, and let's get started. Do you remember item 5 from Maggie's will? We see that Maggie nominated her sister Marion Proctor. You heard her voice at the beginning of this clip. Well, she nominated Marion Proctor as a representative for dealing with her will, and that occurred on August 15, 2005, which happened to be a Monday. Remember that date. But then someone scratched out her name and replaced it with the soon-to-be deceased Randolph Murdaugh III. Well, I suppose it depends on when the scratching out happened. You know, this idea of whether he was soon to be deceased. Perhaps it was long before Randolph's illness. And we'll get to that. But it is important to remember when she wrote her will, Monday, August 15, 2005. What was going on at that time? Now, when I first saw this document, I assumed this was more legal shenanigans from one of the Murdaugh clan, that they had fraudulently put their name on a legal document. And yes, the shocking twist, it wasn't actually Maggie's sister Marion who,
for reasons unknown, and that it resumed its course and was subsequently set for self-destruct by you for reasons unknown.
Marion was first added to Maggie's will for reasons unknown and then subtracted from it for reasons unknown. Murdaugh's lawyer swears this did not happen after Maggie died. According to the Island Packet, quote, Jim Griffin said, changing Maggie's will was not done after her death. I can tell you that. No one did that after her death. So that would have been done during her lifetime by her. Do you believe that? And if it's true that Maggie changed it herself, where does that take us? According to NBC News, quote, Jim Griffin, an attorney for Alec Murdaugh, says it's not clear why Proctor's name was crossed out and replaced, but he told the Island Packet that he didn't believe the will was motive for Alec Murdaugh to be involved in his wife's death. Oh, that's not the motive. Going back to the article, quote, Alec Murdaugh's attorneys didn't immediately respond to a request for comment. Well, of course they didn't. Well, I found this moment quite interesting during the trial. Marion, Buster's aunt, giving Buster a big old hug, even though Buster is testifying in open support of the prime suspect accused and later convicted of murdering Marion's sister Maggie. And then right beside the embracing pair, we see John and Randy sitting side by side looking on. What's going on? Well, in terms of the will, would you believe that Marion knew nothing about it and that on the same day it was written, Monday, August 15, 2005, it was actually Maggie who changed her representative to Alex's father. Now, why would she want to do that? Now, regarding this document, the Murdaugh's lawyer, Jim Griffin, has said the following. He said, I think that affidavit kind of clarifies any question that may arise whether Marion Proctor got pushed out, if somebody speculating, he said. The affidavit, John Marvin Murdaugh said, is intended to show that there's no issue between Maggie's and Alex's families. We're all on very good terms, he said. Maggie certainly is very innocent in all this, and I just want to serve her the best that I can. And then with regard to this subject matter, when the publication contacted Marion Proctor, she didn't return a call for comment. But hold on, it's a little strange that there isn't an issue between Maggie's sister and the family of Maggie's murderers, isn't it? I mean, if someone murdered your relative, would you be getting along great with that person's family? Anyway, the substance of the affidavit suggests two things. Firstly, that Maggie may have had mixed feelings about her sister, and haven't we all had variable relationships with our siblings over the years? But also, what was so urgent that on a certain Monday, over 15 years ago, Maggie needed to make sure that day that her assets devolved back to Alec Murdaugh? What is the rush? I mean, even without a will, her assets would have devolved back to her husband due to intestate laws. If you don't set up a will, it happens automatically. And wasn't 2005 around the time Alex was having an affair? And Maggie apparently kicked him out of the house because of his infidelity. And so if you think about that, 15 years prior to Maggie's death is right around the time this will was conceived. So at the same time that Alec was having this affair, the will was being sorted out as well. And so if you ask me, my theory is that it was actually Alec Murdaugh who instructed Maggie on who to place in her will. He may have read it, and you could imagine that he would have insisted that he read it, saying, hey, it's my job, I'm a lawyer, let me have a look at what you've got here, let me advise you. And when he did read it, perhaps he objected to his sister as the executor. And we know that he's been described as a dominant person, as quite a controlling person, and perhaps he then insisted on having his own father there instead, and then almost dictating to Maggie, instructed her to change those details on her own will. That's speculation. I don't know if that is what happened, but if that is the case, Alec Murdaugh not only knew the intricacies of Maggie's will, but was intimately involved in them as well. And, this is someone who is very involved in legal contracts. Why would he not be involved in his wife's legal contract? It's also just a little convenient, a little lucky, if that's the word, that her executor dies 3 days after she does, and her murderer ultimately pockets the proceeds regardless. Because if you know the law, you know murderers aren't supposed to profit from their crimes. So do you see, if you set up someone to be the executor and then that person dies, it ultimately ends up being almost a situation that allows for an intestate type situation. Not technically, because Alec was set up as the beneficiary anyway. But now, as thickened as the plot already is, it gets even thicker. Because although Maggie listed her murderer as the beneficiary of her estate and the executor as her murderer's dad, as I say, also dies, and then her murderer's brother ends up being the executor. What would Maggie have said about that? I mean, if we could communicate with her directly right now, and if we could ask her, and we said, Maggie, how do you feel about your murderer's brother, instead of your sister, how you originally had it, handling your estate? How would you feel about that being the case now that you're no longer with us? And then concomitant to this question, Maggie, how do you feel about what actually happened to your estate? Is that how you wanted your assets to be dealt with? Because if you think about Maggie's estate as a financial contrivance designed by someone else, well, wasn't it quite convenient that if you'd like your, well, I guess her property back, then you have proxies that have your back. You've got legal proxies regardless of being a prime suspect in her murder. Do you think Maggie wouldn't have minded another Murdaugh dealing with her possessions after her murder? In previous analysis, I dealt with these strange financial machinations surrounding Moselle, aka Cross Swamp Farm. But what about the other property? What about the beach house? And a guy called John Murphy left the following comment. He said, "You do not mention the other property, the beach house, ? What is the disposition of that property?" And my response is that Alec Murdaugh sold the Edisto property in July 2022 for just under $1 million. He co-owned the Edisto beach house with Maggie, and so when she died, it became his. And I think it's an open question. Should it have become his after she died? So, as a matter of fact, just a few days ago, Edisto was resold. That's within the last week. Edisto was resold for $1.18 million. I suspect by someone who perhaps doesn't want to be tarred by the Murdaugh brush, or, especially after the high-profile trial, or perhaps it's a situation of sightseers popping around, knocking on doors, taking photos, and perhaps wanting a tour of the place, and perhaps that's not particularly appealing. And what's not to like? The Edisto Beach House has got a sun deck, vaulted ceilings, creaky timber floors, a nicely kitted out gourmet kitchen, and a cozy wood-burning fireplace. And all that sort of backgrounded by the sound of the sea. According to the New York Post, and this is, as I say, less than a week ago, quote, Alex and Maggie Murdaugh purchased the 4-bedroom, 3-bathroom Cape Cod-style estate in 2002 for $415,000, according to records obtained by the Post. Now, it seems to indicate that they both paid a share into that purchase. It wasn't just Alex buying it. The article goes on to note that Murdaugh sold the Edisto Island home near Charleston in July 2022 for $955,000, quite a nice, handsome profit there. At the same time that he sold this house at the same time that he was arrested and charged with murdering Maggie, the co-owner of this house, and his youngest son, Paul. Do you see how this is potentially problematic? If he killed Maggie, does he have a right to any of her assets? And in this case, it looks like at least 50% of Edisto wasn't his to begin with. It goes on to note, quote, the residence was also sold less than a year after he was charged with insurance fraud, conspiracy to commit insurance fraud, and filing a false police report. Don't you kind of get the feeling that why the rush to sell this house? I mean, where are you going to live? You're selling all your homes. Why? Why are you doing that? So how do we feel about the relative ease with which money and assets seem to disappear down legal loopholes? What is our opinion on the legalities, right? According to the Post and Courier, quote, a few states, including South Dakota, California, and Alaska, require sellers to disclose psychological stigma associated with a property. And the article notes that what qualifies as that is debatable. So if you were a lawmaker, if it was up to you, would you demand disclosure of psychological stigma? You might say, definitely. But how about if you were a house owner, say the owner of the Ramsey home or the owner of 1122 King Road? Well, the reason I think the stigma is necessary, perhaps temporarily, especially to begin with, is to prevent easy sales shortly after something horrible happens. Why would you want to do that? Well, surely there should be some impediments, psychological and otherwise, to quickly selling properties associated with a crime. I mean, isn't the selling of a property after a crime part of the reason the crime was committed in the first place? So that one can sell without interference, so that one can raise money quickly without interference. Wasn't that what was attempted in the Chris Watts case? Wasn't that what was attempted in the Scott Peterson case? But going back to the article, quote, but South Carolina doesn't require disclosure on the reasoning that a negative association is not a material defect. But agents can't lie about a stigma either, according to the article, even if admitting to it reduces the price. Now, according to the article, they note that they are not surprised that stigmatized properties often do sell below market rate. In a way, the agent here says that how much a buyer is willing to pay within this situation reflects a social appraisal. How does society evaluate the value of a property? And so the article concludes very eloquently that in the collective imagination, tragedy has devalued the property. And I think this is a fascinating insight into how crime devalues ultimately how much a society and everything in it is worth, right? A crime anywhere basically devalues that society, the properties, it sort of undermines the quality that a society once enjoyed. Just think about the community in Moscow, Idaho, and the desire of other students to now be part of that community. Can you see how crime can devalue how much a society is worth? And we see that just in one way reflected in the market price of a property where crime occurred. It's quite a sobering thought, isn't it? Now, we're going to continue this conversation on the whole financial money train in the next episode. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you guys next time.